This video is about the IQR, or the interquartile range. What the IQR is the difference between quartile 3 and quartile 1. In our last lesson, we talked about interquartile range a little bit. We did a little bit of practice with interquartile range, so we're just hitting it again because it is actually a dispersion measurement. Although we used it in the 5-number summary and we used it to find upper and lower fences, it is actually a measure of dispersion. So if we were giving this a formula, the IQR equals the max value minus, not the max value, I'm thinking of range here. Let me back up and get this straight. It would be quartile 3 minus quartile 1 to give us the interquartile range value. Now, what this particular measurement does is it gives us an indication of the difference between the middle 50% of our data. Another thing that the IQR does is it does help us to determine if we have outliers in our data. So those are the two major things that the IQR does. It helps us to determine the difference between the spread and the middle 50%, and it helps us to determine if we have outliers in our data. So as we look at the advantages for computing an IQR, it is very easy to compute, especially if we have the 5-number summary. A second advantage is that it does help us determine the outliers. The disadvantage, however, is that it's only generally works with the middle 50%. So sometimes just knowing the middle 50% and how spread out it is doesn't really help us with the entire set of data. So just to give us an example here, if we had a 5-number summary, of 5, 8, 10, 12, and 20. And we wanted to find the interquartile range. 12 would be quartile 3, and 8 would be quartile 1, so that gives us an IQR of 4. Now, to just run through how to find to determine if we have outliers, then we would take this interquartile value and do 1.5 times that value, which means we would get 6. And then we would add that value to quartile 3, which is 12. So we get 18. And we would take quartile 1, which is 8, and subtract the 6, so we would get 2. So these become our fences. We have our upper fence and our lower fence. And these tell us if we have values that are above the upper fence or below the lower fence, that those are outliers. And right off the bat, even though we don't have all the data for this data set, we know that this max value of 20 is beyond that upper fence. So that means that we would have an outlier of 20. We don't have anything below the lower fence because 5 is above the 2, so we don't have an extreme value below that fence. So we only have that extreme value of 20 that we know of with that maximum value. But that's how we would calculate using the IQR to find out if we had any outliers with our data.